Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ivan from Business Review, and I will be your host. We are delighted to have people attending today from 6 different continents, all wanting to hear more about managing quality in clinical trials. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar platform On24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin this session. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget, which you'll find on the top right corner of your screen. And please use the yellow help widget if you require any assistance, and know that you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides. Today's webinar is brought to you by Diligent Pharma, based in Philadelphia. Diligent runs the Diligent Qualification Platform, which is used by clinical trial sponsors to identify and qualify providers of services or technologies for clinical research. It enables sponsors by giving them access to existing vendor qualification assessment reports, or by sharing new assessments across multiple trial sponsors. Today's panelists are drawn from the global network of quality auditors that Diligent uses to assess providers. I would like to present to you our first speaker, Jennifer Sessions. She is a senior director in Diligent Pharma, located in Charleston, South Carolina. Jennifer has more than 25 years of experience in the industry and has worked across various research and development sectors, including pharmaceutical industry, academia, and biotechnology. She has specific expertise in the areas of clinical development, clinical operations, and pharmaceutical project management. Jennifer is also a certified Six Sigma Black Belt. Jennifer, over to you.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome. We're so happy that you could join us today. I would like to echo Ivan's welcome to you all and just say that we're so delighted that we have so many people watching with QA and compliance responsibilities in sponsor and vendor organizations. Today, we're going to hear from a panel of expert independent auditors who are part of the Diligent network of quality assessors. No two auditors are the same, so we're going to hear 3 different viewpoints so you can benefit from all their experiences with vendor quality audits. So shortly, I'm going to hand it over to Steve, Mary, and Joe, but firstly, let me introduce to you our distinguished panel of auditors. First, we have Steve Gilbride. Hi, Steve. Steve is the president of SG Research International, which is a pharmaceutical consulting firm with offices in Wyckoff, New Jersey, and Beijing, China. Steve has over 30 years of hands-on experience with success in developing and implementing U.S. and international clinical programs and regulatory strategies. And not only does Steve have extensive experience in global regulatory affairs and quality assurance in clinical trials, but he also has a master's degree in regulatory affairs. So welcome, Steve. Yep. Next, I would like to introduce Mary Mackney. Mary is based in the UK. Mary has a strong scientific background and over 25 years of pharmaceutical and clinical research experience. This is combined with her extensive experience in performing MHRA, GCP, GMP, and pharmacovigilance audits, including mock inspections for several large pharmaceutical companies. Mary has also been particularly effective in the training, setup, and implementation of quality management systems in accordance with GCP, GLP, and GMP regulations. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
Thirdly, I would like to introduce Joseph Shank. Joe is located in Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania. He has over 35 years of experience conducting GMP, QSR, GCP, and GLP audits. Joe has particular proficiency in developing and executing computer systems validation procedures and plans to meet FDA requirements for regulated computer systems. So welcome, Joe, as well.
Thank you.
So for the first half of our webinar session today, each of our panel members will share their insights on how to get the best from supplier audits. And then in the second half of the segment today, we will focus on Q&A, and there will be several polling questions along the way as well. Each of our panel members has a slightly different perspective on conducting an audit. However, they all follow these high-level process steps in terms of preparing, performing, and finalizing the audit. This is the framework that we're going to use today, in which the auditors will share their thoughts and experiences of before, during, and after a vendor audit. So overall, what we would like to achieve today are these key learning objectives. We would like for you to hear challenges faced when qualifying service providers. We would like to share with you some insights and tips to conduct assessments of clinical trial service providers to maximize efficiency and speed. And we hope you can discover how to prioritize strategically so internal resources can focus on the highest business risks. And I also want to highlight that the Q&A box is open, so you may submit your questions from now and at any point during the webinar session. So with that, we'll start with our first panelist member, Steve Gilbride, who will walk you through his key insights for managing through the life cycle of an assessment and preparing, conducting, and follow-up. So Steve, I'll hand it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everyone. What I'd like to do today is to discuss my own strategy and thinking as I prepare for a vendor assessment and create an agenda for an audit that will elicit constructive feedback, what my focus is while conducting the vendor assessment, and finally, how I go about writing the report and helping vendors address any nonconformities or deficiencies. Okay? So the first thing to do is do your homework. Never walk into a vendor assessment cold, whether it's on-site or remote. It probably won't be very successful. It's important to talk to sponsors, and sometimes even with sponsors, you get conflicted information because your contact may be far removed from the team involved. Okay, so but it's really important to get as much clarity as you possibly can from the sponsor. All right. Also, check the vendor's website. See how long they've been in business. Consider the phase of development. Are they involved in phase 1, 2, 3? Is that their strength, or phase 4, or do they have a new technology like e-coas or telemedicine? And also to see if they've merged. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time keeping up with the mergers and acquisitions recently. But that's actually very important to know as well. I also talk to colleagues as well, and even there you can get confounding information because you can talk to one colleague who says that vendor A is terrific, they're wonderful, and then you can talk to a similar colleague who says they're not. But it's important to get all this information from the sponsor, from the website, from colleagues. It helps you kind of identify risks and sort of assess them as well. Okay, so I try to create an agenda that tries to elicit feedback. Okay, so for instance, I like to have an agenda where I follow it up with the vendor for a couple of reasons. One is that you can find out what their primary focus is, and Joe Shank will be talking later too about how experienced they are with auditors. Do they get 2 audits a week, or do they get 2 audits a year? That will certainly help you determine their strengths and weaknesses. But I think one of the most important things to do is anytime you're doing an audit, whether it's a vendor or a clinical site, whatever it may be, and regardless of the feedback you get from the sponsor or from the website, from colleagues, don't let a bias intrude your thinking. Go into an audit with an open mind. Okay, next slide there, Jennifer. Mm-hmm. Okay, so conducting the audit, you want to always determine if the vendor's in a state of control. Okay, so what I do is I always ask for a for an organizational chart to see if the organizational chart is up to date. And the reason for it is very similar how regulators look at that. They feel that if you're not organized up on top, you're probably not organized below. So that's just one aspect. Then also to see if they have a quality management system or an effective quality management system. Do they have SOPs? Are the SOPs up to date? Do they have enough SOPs that cover all the functions that they perform? And also to see if everyone is trained on the SOPs. Recently, I did an audit in which the SOPs were very good, and when I asked for training, they didn't have any documentation of training, and basically the response to me was, "Well, we don't really have to train; we already know it." But that's not a adequate, acceptable response. Right? So you want to see if they have a good quality management system. Do they have job descriptions? Do they have SOPs? Are they following the SOPs? Are they not in compliance with their own SOPs? This is actually very important. And this kind of falls into the soft skills area. Don't be afraid to look beyond the agenda. Look at behaviors. This is more, if you're on site, you see it more than you do in terms of doing like a remote audit. But see how people behave to each other, how they're responding to you. Keep your eyes and your ears open. It's very important to see what's going on around you. Don't put your head down into reading their SOPs and be preoccupied with that. I one time had my QA counterpart, after everyone left the room, asked me for a job. Now, when that happens, you know that there may be other issues. Okay. Try to identify gaps and risks and try to assess them. 95% of vendors that I've worked with, generally speaking, the sort of the newer vendors, they appreciate it. They appreciate you taking 25, 30 years experience and leveraging that. And you'll get, it'd be very receptive to them. Sometimes not, but overwhelming, I find that if you present, any gaps, they always want to make them, if you have a good quality improvement process, they'll be very receptive to it. One of the things that I find myself is that being an auditor is very difficult because you're conveying very uncomfortable messages at times. Everybody's working really hard and everything, and you're coming along and kind of picking out issues. But I think it's important that you be diplomatic, don't be accusatory, and just be diplomatic and be honest. And that's really your job as an auditor, to be honest. And sometimes it can be very uncomfortable. Recently, there was a drug depot that I had audited, and the inventory was dangerously low. And what I found out relatively quickly was that there was extremely high turnover in the company. And my QA counterpart, when I looked at his the job description, it said that he needed to have 10 years of GMP, GOP, GCP experience, needed a master's degree. And when I looked at his CV, last year he was driving a potato chip truck around South Dakota, and he didn't have 10 years experience. In fact, he had no experience, and he didn't have a master's degree, and it was very difficult to express to him how I felt he really wasn't qualified. And anytime you're doing an audit, it's always important before you leave to go over all the issues, because not everything is as it appears. As I'm looking at the screen right now, behind me, it looks on the screen, it looks dark blue. Yet when I look behind, it's kind of a light blue. So it's always important to get all the information, get clarity before you leave, and then express and explain what the next steps are. All these issues will be in a report. It'll be sent to you, and we expect a response. Okay? A good report writing really depends on how you left the vendor and how seriously the vendor takes your audit. I've done audits where I can't reach people, or I'm supposed to speak to somebody from IT, they don't show up, or on holiday, or and you have to follow up after. And sometimes that can be difficult as well. Be clear in your writing observations. It was very painful to me, but a long time ago, there was somebody who was a lot older and a lot wiser than I was when I was first starting out. And he gave me some really very good advice. And he would always ask me, what's the observation? You've written a lot. What's the observation? Tell me what the observation is so I understand it. So it's really important to have a very clear and concise observation when you're writing audit reports. And providing the CAPA responses, the CAPA responses should address the observation. And so the example I gave before about no one is trained on the SOPs, I kind of put that into a audit observation, and the response was, well, we're going to hire somebody and we're going to revamp our SOPs, and we should have this done by 1Q 2023. Okay, so they never even addressed the training issue, which was really my observation. They had SOPs that nobody's trained on. And in terms of timing of it, to wait 14, 15 months, I don't believe is acceptable. So you really need to have very clear responses. And if you have an effective CAPA, the effective CAPA really should drive improvement, continuous improvement within the vendor. And so it's very important to get that response and also to be on top. Don't just accept what the responses are, but really evaluate it. And this is also true for like 483s, which Joe will also talk about later, to see what the observation is and respond specifically to the observation. So with that, I think I'll send this over to you, Jennifer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve. So now we have our first polling question of the day. In the past 24 months, have you been involved in a trial with a quality or a timeline problem due to a vendor? So I would encourage all of you to please enter your responses, either yes, no, or not sure, and make sure you click the submit button. And we'll pause about 30 seconds. I think this question definitely applies to both vendors and sponsors. So if you could take a moment and reply, that would be great. And also, I would continue to encourage you to enter your Q&A questions for us at the end of the presentation period. Okay. So let's move to the results now. Okay, so the results are in. We have 60% said yes, they have had a quality or timeline problem, 30% said no, and 10% said not sure. And this is in line with, we did a similar polling question earlier this year in another webinar that we hosted. And the audience had similar responses. They said 83% said yes, 17% said not sure, and 0 said no. So interesting to see the comparison. Thank you for your entries for that. All right, so now we're going to move to our second panelist. Mary Mackney is actually going to give us a slightly different perspective and talk us through the why it's important to conduct vendor audits, and then go through her best approaches for the life cycle of conducting the audit. So Mary, I will hand it over to you now.
Okay, Jennifer, and thank you very much. So what I'm going to do is cover over the next 3 slides. What I'm going to kind of cover is areas of where, firstly, why do we perform these audits? There is a regulatory requirement, there's various requirements. Next thing I'm going to cover is actually how we prepare. Now, all of us, you will see a common theme with us as we present in talking about the preparation. And we'll have a different angle to it, but it's to emphasize what we need to do in order to have an effective outcome as following our actual audits. And then I'm going to cover just very briefly on what we do, what are the key points when we're actually performing the audit, and finally in completing the audit. So it's not just about presenting, which is what people think is the nice part of it, is presenting the findings. We want a successful outcome, a complete package, and we follow it right through to the nth degree and work with the actual the vendor and the sponsor in that complete package. So going back then, why do we do these audits? Well, it's not because it's, you know, we want to create work for ourselves. It's actually part of the vendor selection is a requirement, you know, within a lot of the companies. They are working with vendors that they may not have ever worked with before. They may have had ongoing issues with particular vendors. So we're going in there to actually have a look and part of this vendor selection process for various companies. It might be that it's part of the annual periodic review of the vendors as part of the processes from the sponsor's perspective, and also prior to contracts being renewed. It might be a case of that we look at the performance of those particular vendors and we are asked as auditors to go in and to perform a routine periodic review of them rather than just leaving them to do the work for years on end. It might be that we have problems with allegations of misconduct or overbilling, etc. So there's issues have prompted for us to go in and have investigate and have a look and actually, you know, work out, you know, what is the root cause, what are the issues here. And there is an actual requirement with the legislation that we have to be seen as sponsors. So we're going in on behalf of the sponsors. We have to be seen that we are actually have good oversight of our contractors, of our vendors, actually. And in order to perform that oversight, we cannot just contract out activities. We need to routinely check and do sample checks and sample reviews. So we go in there and have a look. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So, in the preparation, now this is coming across as a general theme throughout all of our presentations today. It is so important that you read and you look into the vendor you're actually going into audit. You are communicating and so you're preparing, you're communicating the process. You need to establish the scope of the audit. Make sure that you have worked with your vendor in order to have a productive audit. In developing the agenda, making sure the sessions and people are available for interviews, correct interviews to be scheduled, identify staff that need to attend the opening and closing meetings. And what you want to do is engage very senior people within the company to actually participate in this audit, especially in areas like the opening and closing meetings. And when you have issues, so that you're engaging it from the top right down to the key players, that you know there is a fair chance that corrective actions and preventive actions will be put in place as a result of your findings. It is very important to actually request correct documentation in your preparation. And quite often when I'm going off to do an audit, I will request standard documents prior to the audit so that I'm getting ready, get a feel for the structure of the company, get a feel for, do they actually have processes in place? And you can do quite a lot of background work so that you're going in there and you have a limited time. Quite often it's 1 to 2 days while you're in there. And that limited time, you actually need to really cover a lot of groundwork. So, you know, if you can do a lot of that beforehand, then it's all the better. Request some SOPs perhaps beforehand. Some companies don't like releasing the SOPs, but at least if you request the SOP index, you know what kind of SOPs they're working to. Request access to electronic systems as well. that actually can save a lot of time and problems during an audit if you can get that up and running before you ever go. Because quite often, systems like that require you to actually have to be trained on them, and which could take, and access could take 1 to 2 days before you ever go on site, actually. Next slide, please, Jennifer. Right, so performing the audit, and right, when you're performing the audit, the important thing is you include a facilities tour, perhaps actually if you're going on maybe a GMP audit, actually interviewing the staff, reviewing the documentation, and all the time, if you can, have documentation that actually assesses the level of compliance with existing processes. I quite often like going in when we already have work ongoing with a particular vendor, so I can use that to actually check their compliance level. Identifying issues and areas of non-compliance. Reporting, and then finally, actually, the audit, so you've already issued the findings, not all of them, and then you go and you write your report, you get it reviewed and finalized, and then you send the CAPA to the vendor. And depending on the requirements of the company, you either work with the vendor in actually finalizing that CAPA, or some people, sponsors just like to kind of complete that part themselves. And then eventually you run to closure and a certificate is issued. So from all of that, what can go wrong? Things do go wrong all the time, and even simple things. Joe will allude to that in his lead up to that in his next presentation. But even simple things like logistics. My luggage didn't arrive one time, and I arrived out in a country that was snowing in my sun gear, and I had to go to the actual audit with limited clothes, but I had to go ahead. The interpreter didn't arrive one time, and I was in a foreign country, but we had to make do with it and go ahead, with the actual audit itself. So lots of things, but the key thing is to be flexible and not rigid, because things do go wrong, and have flexibility in your agenda, which is one of the first things I always say to people when I arrive is, this is fluid. I am totally flexible. I can change the timings and the interview is accessory to suit you. So I will pass back to Jennifer now. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise them and we'll come back to you. Thank you very much. Okay, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. Appreciate your insights. So we have our next polling question. This is the second out of the third polling questions we'll ask today. And the question is, in the past 24 months, have you been involved with a vendor that was new to implementing a quality management system? So if you could please enter your response as yes, no, or not sure. We would greatly appreciate it. We'll give it about 30 seconds. And wait for your responses here. And also just continue along the way to encourage you to enter your questions into the Q&A box, please. Okay. Need to play some Jeopardy music or something here. I could sing for you. We probably don't want that, but that's okay. All right, let's go ahead and move to the responses here. Okay, so pretty split down the middle. So almost a 50-50 split with a small percentage of not sure. I think probably what's most key around implementing a new quality management system is just ensuring that your teams have the proper training and tools in the system structure to succeed in implementing the new quality management system. So thank you very much for entering your responses for that. And we're going to move to our final panelist, Joe Shank, who is also going to take a slightly different approach in sharing with us his insights on what can happen if a supplier is not assessed. So Joe, I will hand it over to you now.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. What I really want to do is build off of and support the question that Mary asked at the end of her presentation, what can go wrong? And so really, we have to look at executing a risk-based approach to our supplier management program. But we do have quite a number of regulators that we have to deal with, and one of the big ones is the FDA. And so the FDA does inspections, and they've had quite a number of inspection findings in different areas. And so I just want to share a little bit with you the fact that in the past 5 years, the FDA has done a number of inspections of contract manufacturing organizations, contract research organizations, contract lab organizations. So these CMOs, CROs, and CLOs get inspected by the FDA as well as get inspected by supplier auditors like us. And so really in the last 5 years, there's been 30-some FDA 483s issued to the suppliers. And so some of you may know what a 483 is. Some of you may have been part of an organization that got a 483, and some of you might be wondering, what the heck is a 483? A 483 is a simple form, and it's just a form where the FDA investigator will document their observations of noncompliance. And so really, it's not a joyous occasion to get a 483 at the end of an inspection. And it will cause quite a bit of stress within the organization. So it's not something that's desirable. It's not desirable at all. And so, we have to look at, what risk do we have of our suppliers being audited by a regulator? And, will they be able to pass any type of inspection? And then also, what's the risk that during our approval process for a new product, we're going to be called on to answer questions that only our suppliers can answer. So are they going to be in the ready position to support us during any type of inspections? And there really is going to be no observations of noncompliance during that audit support that we have to go through. So again, it's a risk-based approach that we have to apply, but it's very important that we understand what's the nature of some of these 483s. And really, in the past 5 years, the number one buzzword for FDA during inspections is data integrity. So the FDA itself has even said, data integrity problems mean that the quality system is deficient in some way. And it typically is the tip of the iceberg where there's a lot of other problems in place. And so they have really included a lot of data integrity type topics in their inspections. And so it's extremely important for us to understand, what are they looking for? Why is data integrity so important? And do we have any risks with our suppliers with respect to data integrity and some of these other supplier management type issues? So with the 70% of the 483s that included some data integrity findings, you might be surprised to learn, or maybe not surprised, that over 60% of those dealt with laboratory systems. And so, some of the findings that the FDA might have is, raw data and sample preparation was not maintained. Data was discarded in the trash. Do you believe that? That happens. Manipulation and deletion of electronic raw data files and folders. Labs are testing into compliance. So they are, testing and disregarding results that might be out of spec without any type of investigation. There's no controls in place to prevent substitution, deletion, or overwriting of data. So, failure to have access controls, sharing usernames and passwords on systems so that, it's very hard to attribute who did what and when did they do it. Failure to have audit trails for some of the lab systems, and audit trails are turned off, or deletion of audit trails. So these are, some key data integrity issues on the laboratory side. Some of the things that happens on manufacturing side, or some of the findings, have been rough notes were taken and controlled on loose paper, but then not included and destroyed after the batch production records put together. Failure to record activities at the time they are performed and destruction of original records, and backdating of production records when personnel were not on site to perform the activity. So, and you would be surprised at how many people ask me, well, what date should I put on here? And so the only answer is today's date. So if there's a reason why something was not recorded and dated at the appropriate time, there needs to be some type of explanation and maybe even a deeper investigation. But we should never be backdating anything. So that will, definitely call into question some of the, overall data that we have in place if we don't have some of these data integrity, controls in place. Another bad thing that can happen, or something that can go wrong, is we've gotten all the way to submitting our new drug application, our biologics license application to the FDA, and we get what's known as a complete response letter, or CRL. So a CRL is not a fun thing to get. It's basically the FDA saying, sorry, we cannot approve your product at this time. And it usually gives reasons why and maybe actions that the firm can take in order to resubmit. And so over the past 5 years, there's been 11 of these complete response letters that were issued which cite third-party issues. So some contract organizations supporting the drug manufacturing or other support processes were inspected by the FDA, and there were issues that came up, and in some cases 43s issued for that. So getting a complete response letter is not a happy time. It can impact the stock price because the CRL doesn't become public, but usually the firm has to announce that they got this CRL. They have a fiduciary responsibility to announce that they got it and kind of summarize it. It's very hard to get these CRLs, where 43s are quite a bit easier to take a look at. But the CRLs just put a halt into everyone's plans. We're getting ready to launch our product, and boom, we get the CRL, and it is a major shock to the organization. So, one interesting fact is that the 11 CRLs that were issued that cited third-party issues is greater than the number of CRLs asking for more clinical data. So everybody's getting their clinical data right, but they're getting some type of supplier problem not right. And they didn't check, they didn't, assess the supplier, or they didn't do a comprehensive job in assessing the supplier. And ultimately the FDA found the troubles and, issued the CRL. So that's not a good thing to get. And it really does cause a lot of additional rework, oversight, and stress. So I think that it's important to know, especially the people in the audience that are aspiring auditors, one of the things you can do to really help your skill set is read some 43s. And there's another thing called the Establishment Inspection Report, or EIR, and read how does the FDA word their findings and describe their inspections. I think that would be very helpful. Another thing that you could take a look at is the ISPE published a good practice guide on data integrity by design. So if you really want to learn about how to check data integrity type controls that are in place, that's a really great place to start to educate yourself. Okay, Jennifer, let's move to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so, also supporting what Steve and Mary have said, I've got some key points that can help you all be more successful. So in preparation, one of the important things I'll do is ask the supplier, okay, how many audits have they hosted in the last 12 months? And so, some suppliers tell me, oh, we get one audit a week. And, that kind of tells me, okay, they've been through the mill. I can expect a very efficient audit. I can expect them to answer my questions without a whole lot of clarifying discussion or debate. And they know the drill. And then if I am talking to a supplier and they, this is their first time they've been audited, well, I know that I have to budget for enough time to clarify some questions and have discussions. And there's most likely going to be more findings involved. So that is definitely key for preparation. Also, in conducting the audit, try to build rapport with the supplier and the supplier's team to make the audit more successful. So that definitely includes thanking them for all their hard work. I thank them at the beginning and the end of the audit because I know how much work it goes into this, but also letting the audit participants know what and why why are we here? Why is the audit extremely important? What are the objectives and standards? And one of the key frustrations I hear from a lot of suppliers is that different auditors come in with different standards, or they have no standards that they're working towards, and so they get a lot of different viewpoints on what should be under control. And so having good standards is critical, and I think that's one of the things that really sets Diligent apart, as they have quite a number of standards so that it can be clearly communicated what are the objectives and topics we're going to be looking at during the audit, and it helps the audit just go more more smoothly. And then also knowing that we're here to help the sponsor enable their contract continuance and growth, so that's a pretty important thing, and so we really need them to support us during that audit. And then finally, making sure we understand that we have multiple sponsor stakeholders when we're writing the report. So some stakeholders, they just want to know the findings. That's all they want to know. They don't want to know anything else. But then there's other sponsor stakeholders who want to understand the robustness of the quality management system and, look at their SOP topics and see that it's, comprehensive. And then there's other sponsor stakeholders who really want to know the operational and project management capabilities, so they understand the risk of a particular project and any future projects that might be coming down the road. So it's really important that we understand we're writing to multiple people. So that concludes my slides. I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you to all the auditors for sharing your insights and perspectives. Very valuable information, very informative. So we have our third and last polling question for today. The question is, in the past 24 months, have you been involved with a vendor audit that uncovered critical findings? So if you could please enter your responses as yes, no, or not sure. And then remember to click the submit button. That would be very much appreciated. And also, just to remind everyone again, if you could please enter any questions that you have in the Q&A box, that would be wonderful. Okay. Just give it another second here. All right, so let's move to the responses. The results are in. 33% said yes, almost 60% said no, 7% not sure. I think, one key takeaway with this is a carryover of some comments that Steve made earlier around addressing and capturing CAPA responses and how important that is, and that CAPAs should drive improvement as a takeaway for that. So given the insights shared by each of our auditors today and how to get the best from supplier audits, I just wanted to take a moment to share with you where Diligent can play an integral part in providing support to you as you think about your own resource utilization and applying resources toward your own qualification needs. On the left hand of this slide, you can see the current traditional model of clinical trial vendor qualification. And as you can see, this model is both complex and time-consuming as each sponsor evaluates each provider. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the Diligent system. This is the model that Diligent employs for clinical trial vendor qualification, which is a much more simplified and streamlined selection and qualification process of clinical trial service providers using our online cloud-based platform. Essentially, just a little bit more about the platform. The Diligent Qualification Platform holds comprehensive requests for information RFI details for industry suppliers around the world, as well as vendor qualification assessments audited against the latest industry standards. It makes it easier for trial sponsors to identify and qualify relevant potential suppliers much more quickly than by using traditional methods. It's also a great time saver for industry suppliers as it cuts the number of RFIs to be completed and the VQAs to host, while providers maintain 100% control over who sees their company information. So essentially, it's an innovative and standardized system that helps drive efficiency and speed in qualifying vendors. So applying this model would enable you to prioritize your internal resources in a more effective way. So wanted to make sure we shared that with you as well. So now you've heard the insights and the experiences and the knowledge of our distinguished panel of auditors who all work very hard for us at Diligent. So we're very happy to have their insights. I've also given you a little bit of information around the support that Diligent could provide. And we have received a lot of questions along the way. So I'm very excited to open this up for Q&A with the panel members. So Steve, Mary, and Joe, we've received quite a few questions. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. The first question, so thinking about the impact pre and post COVID, what are some of the differences in terms of how you conduct an on-site versus virtual audit? So do you have any tips to make remote audits more efficient, and maybe just speak to the differences? Steve, maybe if you could take this one.
Okay, be more than glad to. With COVID, there's a new paradigm of conducting remote vendor audits. And the reality is that you could probably get through the documentation, through SOPs and training, look at job descriptions, look at CVs. You could probably get a fair amount of information as well as the previous experience. The only problem with doing a remote audit is the vendor will show you what they want you to see. So you're kind of taken away the walking around the facility. So if some have a handheld, their iPhone, they walk you through the facility, they're not going to show you, broken glass or spills or dead rodents, things like that. And there's other things that you don't see as well. I once was walking through a lab, and everybody had on their terminal a Post-it note. And when I looked at it closer, it was basically showing them how to do their job. And so my feeling was that the training was not robust enough, that they had to rely on these sort of cheat sheets, so to speak. So there is a difference. You can probably, my own feeling is that for remote audits, you can probably get 80%. So I'll leave it up to the other panelists, Mary, Joe, what your experience has been. Mary?
Mary, are you there?
Is Mary on mute?
Maybe she went on mute.
Sorry, Mary was on mute. I apologize. I took the wrong button, actually.
No worries.
So I'm personally speaking, I prefer, if I can, go on site, actually. But we haven't had that luxury, and a lot of companies are pushing back now and pushing us back that COVID is still the reason not to go on site. I think I think your preparation for the audit in the event of a COVID, and you have to do it online, is very, very important. And if you can build up, that rapport with the company beforehand, you can get quite a lot of information out. It really is those facility tours that you find difficulty in actually getting the full picture, actually. And it's, for me personally, they're not the best, actually, but it's what we had to do with the circumstances at the time. But I now still push for the on-site if I can at all, actually. Joe?
Yeah, just make a quick comment. Everything has been, web meetings to do these audits. And so, like Steve said, there's, and Mary said, there's 80% of, what you can cover by not being able to go on site. But I think one of the key things, too, is, not being able to read body language during responses to audit questions. And so when you're on site, you can kind of read the body language, see if you're getting, maybe not the whole truth or something that's, much less than the truth. But during a web meeting, especially when people have their webcams turned off, you might not be able to get that kind of body language feedback. And so that does maybe hamper going in certain directions and looking deeper, like the FDA says, okay, this is the tip of the iceberg, but how can we look deeper if we can't read the people that we're auditing? So that's a critical skill for auditing, is being able to read body language, and it's hard to do that in a web meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that. Some people leave their cameras off as well. And so you can't see what's going on, even though they may be in the office, they have their cameras off. I one time did an audit where the vendor was, there's a hostile takeover. And they had 40,000 square feet of space, which is, I think, if I'm correct for those, use a metric system, around 3,800 square feet of space. The reality is that most of it was empty. And if you go there physically, you'll be able to see it. You'll see row after row of empty terminals. In a remote audit, you may not be able to pick that up.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep moving, guys. Lots of questions. This is a really good one. Would you go into a discussion? Would you go into a discussion on any kind of observation and how to handle this during the audit performance? So maybe Joe, we could start with you for this one.
So I think that it's good to get an understanding of how the supplier manages risk. And if they can, barely spell risk, then we know we have a problem. So, but understanding what the scope of the audit is and communicating that is, pretty critical at the beginning of the audit. But, understanding how the supplier manages risk. And then, we can look at the vulnerable areas and really determine, are they proactively or passively mitigating this particular risk. So I think that's important.
Perfect. Okay, another great question. At what stage in a startup biotech company do I need to audit my vendors? We are only in phase 1. At what stage in a startup biotech company do I need to audit my vendors? We are only in phase 1. Mary, maybe do you want to take that one?
Yeah, that is quite an interesting one, because I would say you're talking about they're only in phase 1. Already I would start saying you are contracting. I'm going to make the assumption you're a small company, you've contracted out quite a lot of work. I would start from the very beginning. You're already in phase 1, and therefore you have some GCP, GMP, and pharmacovigilance requirements. I would start it and start getting an audit program together and put in, as a result of a risk assessment, and start your reviews of your contractors from day 1, actually.
Okay, Great, thank you. Are there any specific topics or functional areas which are frequently more vulnerable to risk than others, just in your experience across the board? Steve, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. There's always risk, and it's really to assess the risk and to see if the vendor has a risk SOP, risk management SOP. What I find this kind of falls into the same question that was previously asked about, a phase one, a small biotech. My own experience is that there's a lot of risk with biotech companies because when they kind of get up and running, they don't have a lot of resources, and they certainly don't have a lot of QA resources. They don't have an independent QA group. So I think there's always that risk, and so they oftentimes contract this out to CROs, and so it's really without assessing the CROs. So my own feeling is that almost everything is a risk. You have a compound that's not approved by any regulatory agency, and you're experimenting this on human beings. I think so. I think that almost it may not answer the question totally, but I think that almost everything is a risk. If ultimately what your goal is to have the drug approved, I think you really need to assess all your vendors and see what their risk is and see if it's an acceptable risk. Joe, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, again, we have a very short and limited time to get a snapshot of the whole quality management system in place. So getting the vendors and suppliers communicate to us their definition of risk management and the steps that they're taking, and I have a particular interest in the IT and computerized systems area where there's a lot of risk. And so making sure that everyone is doing a risk-based approach to how they manage their IT infrastructure to protect records from unauthorized access or accidental deletion. I mean, all these records are intellectual property of the sponsors, and if we lose information because we didn't manage our risk, that's a pretty vulnerable area that has a huge impact back to the sponsor.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up. What do you consider the main difference is between qualification and a routine supplier audit? Mary, do you want to respond to this one?
So the difference between the qualification and routine supplier
like an
audit.
in-study audit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I mean the qualification is our initial is going in there and assessing the company for the requirements for your contractors' activities, actually. So in actual fact, quite often with your qualification process, you'll have a few companies being reviewed in order to see that if they are qualified, actually. And the difference between that and the other, you don't really have anything to go on to assess level of their compliance because you haven't actually performed any work with them to date. Whereas in the other type of audit, they're already working with you as a company, a sponsor company. So in that case, you have quite a lot of actually data to actually check their level of compliance, a lot of documentation. And for me personally, I think that second one is a far more productive audit, whereas the first one for the qualification, you really are assessing, do they have the basic requirements in order to perform the contractor's work. And quite often in that case, you have to really dig deep because the larger companies will have perfect processes and their systems have been tested, and so they'll present the perfect scenario. And so you really have to be an experienced auditor to really get as much information out of this as possible. Now, sorry, I think we're running out of time. Sorry, Jennifer.
You're great. Yeah, no, this is great. It's been very engaging and very informative, and we really, really appreciate all the questions that have come in. We are at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for today. But again, thank you for submitting your questions. We will make the slides available to you. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with the contact email. Let me advance the slide. With the contact email and information on the last slide in the deck. For the questions that we weren't able to answer today, we will get responses to you within the next 48 hours. Again, we just want to thank our listeners. We want to thank Yvonne for hosting today. Want to give extra special thanks to the panelists for your insights and what you shared with us today, which is extremely valuable. We would be delighted to talk to you more about the supplier assessment issues at your organization and see how Diligent might be able to help you. No obligation, of course, but please feel free to reach out to us with the contact information on this last slide. And again, thank you. I hope you found this session very interesting and informative. And if you would like to hear more topics about this in the future, we would love to hear that as well. So thank you again. Ivan, I don't know if you have any other final parting comments.
I just want to add, there will be a short survey after the end of this webinar, and I would like to ask our attendees to take a minute and fill it out. And that's it. Otherwise, thank you for the wonderful presentation and the great discussion after that.
Yes.
And I would like to wish everyone, the team of Diligent Pharma and also all our attendees, a very nice day.
Yeah.
And follow us for more webinars.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.